What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and my in-depth review of Arcade1up's Terminator 2. Alright, we gotta start off the review by checking out the box that the cabinet comes in, and it looks really good. I mean, come on, it's Terminator 2. How can you mess this up with the iconic T-800 head in the background with the single red eye? It looks great, and it serves as a good preview for things to come. Moving on to the assembly, we start with the riser, and a pro tip, I like to use wood glue on every screw that goes into wood, specifically when we're talking about your riser assembly and the J panels on the side panels. Also a little bit of wood glue on every wooden dowel. Now at first glance, this does look like just another standard riser. As far as the height and the width is concerned, it is, but there is a substantial difference in the depth, about 2.5 inches. And that's something you really want to be aware of if you have a common riser for multiple Arcade1ups. Luckily, mine was just wide enough. Moving on with the assembly, and another pro tip, I like to use blue Loctite on every screw that's going to go into metal threads. It's just another way to kind of keep things nice and tight. You know, of all the Arcade1up cabinets that I've assembled, this is going to be one of my favorites. It just went together really simple, really easy, a lot of 90-degree angles, and some people may not like that simple design, but for me it's actually a nice change of pace. Some of the angles on some of the other cabinets don't always work out as well, and it could make assembly a pain. This panel is always going to be an issue. I had to put a little piece of tape there to kind of keep that in place during the assembly process. Similar to the Big Blue and the Killer Instinct cabinet, we have our extension panels on the side to give the overall cabinet a height increase. And taking a closer look at that speaker panel marquee combo, it is a return to more of a traditional marquee and a great design. I hope we see this moving forward on other cabinets. And because the overall design of this cabinet is sort of big and blocky, it allows for easy routing of wires from the marquee and the speaker panel down to the PCB. Now this and the Ridge Racer cabinet both make use of online leaderboards, but unlike the Ridge Racer cabinet, this PCB does not have an Ethernet port. Making our way down to the control panel, we have our standard Arcade1up ribbon cable, as well as a USB Type-B cable, similar to most encoders that I've used on multiple projects, and this cable is no doubt required for the send-in light guns. And this third cable supplies 12 volts to the control panel directly from the AC adapter via a splitter cable. So the size of this oddly shaped bottom cover lets me know there's probably not a lot going on under the hood of the control panel, and, well, my suspicions have definitely been confirmed. It's just a simple encoder board with 2 USB ports and sort of unnecessary start buttons. I mean, really, if you just have the single start button in the middle, you would eliminate 2 buttons and a lot of this wiring. And before I install the control panel, I wanted to take a closer look at the bezel artwork, which is not gloss black like every other Arcade1up ever. It's more of a matte silver. It looks really good. It's a nice contrast to the black sides of the cabinet. And the last pro tip for this video is going to be those plastic washers that I use for all the screws that secure your control panel. It's really to protect that deck protector, because if that thing gets scratched or cracked, you're going to see it and it's going to bother you for the rest of your life. The most important part of any shooting cabinet is definitely going to be the guns themselves. And we knew that send-in gun technology was going to be the thing that powered these guns, but when we heard about the force feedback, when the cabinet was announced, I knew that I had to get inside and see what is providing that feedback. I also wanted to point out that 3 of these screws are longer than the other screws. They go on the very top of the gun, so just make sure you keep those separated whenever it's time to reassemble. And now comes the not so easy part of actually separating the 2 halves. Because of the orange ring in the front, it's not just as simple as splitting the 2 halves to get a good look inside. This thing is sort of snapped on. There could be a little bit of adhesive. There's no easy way that I can see to get it out. And one thing that I did notice is that there's no clear plastic lens like I have on the blue gun. I think that's really there to protect the camera inside, so that's a little bit disturbing. I may have to get my hands on another gun, and it makes me feel a little bit better about what I'm about to do. Now that may not be the correct disassembly method, but it worked for me, and you see that the only damage is really just a split in the ring itself, which I can just super glue when I reassemble the gun. And now let's take a closer look at what's providing that force feedback in these guns. So for those of you that criticized the early footage of these guns and said that it sounded like baseball cards in the spokes of a bicycle wheel, well, you might have been onto something. That's basically what we have here. All the circuitry inside the gun seems pretty straightforward. You got the kill switch towards the rear. There's a small PCB up front. There's the camera itself. I really wish I had that clear piece of plexi that was going to cover that and protect that end. And yeah, here is the motor itself, the drive motor. A little closer look at that. Looks like we have a few resistors there, but should be a simple, easy part to change if you can get your hands on one. I also noticed that when you push the grenade button, it acts just like the trigger, so it doesn't pulse for each individual grenade launch. Now when you power up the cabinet, you're not going to be greeted with the Arcade1up splash screen. You're going to be prompted to actually calibrate the guns. Now this happens every time you cycle power on the machine. It's not necessary to go through the calibration process. You can just press the start button to exit and then continue on. Okay, I wanted to do a little bit of a compatibility check. I'm going to unplug the Player 1 cable and plug it into the Player 2 port. I want to see if the screen recognizes that it's the same gun or the blue gun that I'm using in the second player slot or vice versa. And you can see that if you take the red gun, you plug it into the first port, it doesn't really matter. Even though we know that's a separate port on the encoder board, it still registers the red reticle. Switching over to the first player or the blue gun and plugging it into the second player cable connector, it gives you a little bit of a different result. It doesn't react at all in any way. No matter what I did, no matter how close or far back away from the screen, I just couldn't get the blue reticle to react, so I had to power down the system and start over. Now because there's only one game on this cabinet, you're going to be limited on what you can select from the main menu. So let's take a look at the settings. You're going to see a lot of standard stuff here like game difficulty. Bombs per play was something I really enjoyed cranking up. That made the gameplay a lot more fun. There are a lot of options, nothing as far as scan lines, but I really wanted to draw your attention to things like the start level. Once you clear a level, it becomes sort of unlockable and you can start the game from that level. Also the smart rumble, which is the way the guns react to the amount of energy you have during gameplay. The rumble or the feedback is not constant. It varies based on what's going on inside the game. And turning this feature on or off makes a pretty big difference. In these clips I'm about to show you, pay attention to the gun power meter on the screen and see how the rumble reacts to that when this feature is turned on. And it's also important to stay a good distance back from the monitor for the send-in light gun technology to work effectively. This isn't like Duck Hunt when you can just put the light gun on the CRT and kill all the ducks. You really need to be back a good 3 or 4 feet, but when you do that, you'll see how precise the gun can really be. The power switch on this cabinet is not two position, it is momentary, similar to the NBA Jam cabinet, so it has to power up and power down, just something to be aware of. Audio clarity isn't bad on this cabinet, but when it comes to straight up volume, it still can't compete with a 3rd generation cabinet. I think cable management is definitely an issue. I wish there was some sort of way to retract these cables back into the cabinet or maybe a pocket to sort of hide them in. This looks a little tacky. And as tall as this front panel is, it really could have benefited from one of those molded coin doors. And unfortunately, the marquee looks pretty washed out with the lights on or off. I think this is going to be an issue with a mostly black marquee. It is what it is at this point. It's going to come down to your personal preference. Okay, so with all that being said, do I recommend Arcade1up's Terminator 2? Well, I think what you have here is a really nice $500 cabinet. The only problem is it doesn't cost $500, it costs $700. Now, after considering all the pros and the cons, and even though this is one of the games that I just had to have, and it was definitely a must-buy for me day one, I cannot recommend it at $700. So definitely wait for this thing to go on sale for $5 or $5.50, and you won't be disappointed. Thanks for stopping by and checking out this review, and I will see you next time.